Avendo iniziato in ritardo sarò severissima sulla durata delle presentazioni e quindi apro subito i lavori con la presentazione di Kevin Brownlow, che tutti conosciamo, documentarista e storico del cinema muto, che è anche un grande esperto e appassionato di Valentino. Kevin?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be in this fascinating town talking about this fascinating subject. Here is a quote to start us off on the wrong foot. He wasn't a very good actor. He worked with uninteresting directors who used mediocre scripts. His films just don't hold up. So declared the composer of an opera, Dominic Argento, who wrote The Dream of Valentino in 1994. This sort of opinion by one artist of another is incredibly unfair. Back in 1994, you could see barely any Valentino film in a quality that did justice to the technicians that made it. It reflects the impact of The Sheik, the one film in which Valentino was directed to act as a parody of himself, and a film of which he was ashamed. It is still hard to see Valentino films in first-class quality. The owners of the rights of The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse still do not see that it is worth releasing on DVD or anything else. Nonetheless, I have to admit that no major star has ever succeeded on such thin material as Valentino was so often given. It is to his credit that he rebelled and walked out of his contract, but he was a superb actor, and it is outrageous that his best work is still not generally available 90 years after its release. Talking of The Sheik, when we were researching a documentary on Cecil B. DeMille, I came across this night letter dated September the 17th, 1921, from Cecil B. DeMille in Hollywood to Jesse Lasky in New York. Having seen The Sheik and remembering your opinion of it, I want to tell you mine, and then let's watch and see who's right. I think it is a very stupid and uninteresting picture, with not a moment of reality, and it bores one throughout. Agnes Ayres is very bad, and with the exception of a few scenes, much of her beauty is gone. Valentino is apparently so made to overact in his big close-ups that my children screamed with laughter as each close-up of him came on the screen. In this picture, there are some of the most beautiful shots of Arabs riding that I have ever seen. But I saw so many Arabs riding for so long, I would take little naps and wake up to find them still riding. I know you thought this picture was a winner. Don't go too strong on it, as I have a $50 bill that says it's a lemon. Any takers? Letters like that tell us more about the attitudes of the time than volumes of film history, which is why I feel that letters are the next great goldmine of information, and why I'm looking forward so eagerly to the talk about those that Valentino wrote to his brother. I'm sure he felt much the same about The Sheik. Sheik is set in the desert, and I think When I was starting out as a film collector, I never paid much attention to Valentino. I was put off by all those women swooning over him, all the campery that goes with it. But then in the 1950s, I began to visit the collector in Camden Town, who would give shows every Saturday of silent films. He ran original nitrate prints and accompanied them on 78 gramophone records from his vast collection. Here I saw Son of the Sheik in a nitrate lavender print, my first Valentino film. And I met Leslie Flint, head of the Valentino Memorial Guild. I was invited to his house in Westbourne Grove. He told me he chose it because Valentino had stayed there on his trip to London in 1925. It had been the home of the celebrated actor George Arliss. I was confronted by a huge painting of Monsieur Beaucaire. However, the person in the costume was not Valentino. It was Leslie Flint. Flint was short and stocky, and at first glance, with his silver hair and impeccable couture, he resembled an oil tycoon. In fact, he was a medium, a very successful and thus very rich medium. The BBC once made a television program about his activities, and the interviewer asked him, "If you're so interested in Valentino, Mr. Flint, and you're a medium, why don't you contact him in the other world?" "Oh, I have," said Flint. "Oh, what did he say?" "I thought you'd ask that question." And he pressed a button on a tape recorder, and you heard a voice say, "Are you there, Rudy?" "Yes." "Are you coming back to the world of cinema?" "No." "Why not?" "Too much of sex and of violence." The critic Alexander Walker heard Valentino at one of these seances and said he sounded a bit like Charles Boyer, which was correct, he said, since he'd been taught English by a French governess. I had another link with Valentino. I acquired a 16mm print of the 1919 production Eyes of Youth, directed by Albert S. Parker, in which Valentino appeared in reel 6. I already knew Parker. The first film I ever acquired was a Douglas Fairbanks comedy of 1916, in which Parker played the villain. When I began work as an office boy in the film industry, I kept hearing about an actors' agency called Al Parker Limited, and with my one-track mind felt this must be the same fellow. So I rang him up, and it was. He asked me over to his Mayfair office, and he told me all about Fairbanks and said that he had discovered Valentino. Well, I knew Valentino made enough pictures before this one for me to take that with a pinch of salt. But Eyes of Youth undeniably had a profound effect on Valentino's career. His brief performance had so impressed June Mathis, she'd cast him in The Four Horsemen. Another link. The first time my parents ever went out together was to see The Four Horsemen on its reissue at Valentino's death in 1926. It deeply impressed them, and they always spoke of it with reverence. In the late 50s, I borrowed a print from the British Film Institute and showed it on my 16mm projector. Even in that form, no tinting, no music, it came over with great impact. But whenever I saw it subsequently, I was dismayed to see bad quality prints with essential scenes missing. The National Film Archive had a 35mm tinted nitrate print, which, since it had been copied onto safety stock, was to have been destroyed. All nitrate was destroyed in those days in England, just as it still is, criminally, in Russia and Germany. But the caretaker of the archive, whose job it was to incinerate it, couldn't bring himself to do it. It was an elaborately tinted print, for its director, Rex Ingram, was an artist and exulted in the emotion he could bring to the film through colour. When David Gill and I made the Hollywood series in 1980, we showed the crew a number of silent films in as close to the original form as we could. One was The Four Horsemen. Our contacts smuggled the print out to us, and we showed it at the Imperial War Museum's theatre, one of the last to be licensed for nitrate. It was immediately apparent the print had not long to go. It had been sent to a lab for waxing, and this caused it to go in and out of focus, which ruined our screening. We also realized this was a version cut down for the 1926 reissue. A decade or so later, the print was still in existence when David and I suggested we included The Four Horsemen in the series of silents we were showing in big theatres with live orchestra. So it was a tremendous privilege when Channel 4 agreed to sponsor it, and for our company, Photoplay Productions, to have to restore it first. The Museum of Modern Art had considered restoring it themselves and had completed the first stage, tracking down the material. Archives are far more likely to tell MoMA what they had than to tell us. But MoMA didn't know about this tinted print because it was supposed to have been destroyed. Our contact at the archives smuggled it out for us once again, and besides supplying missing material, it established the tinting pattern. MGM had kept a cutting continuity containing every shot and every title, and this confirmed where missing material had to go. We even found a brief flash of colour. Originally, the main titles and certain shots were in a type of stencil colour known as Handschigel. On my first visit to America to interview the veterans of the silent era in 1964, some people refused to talk, deterred by that intrusive biography of Valentino by Irving Schulman. But most of the time, I found it was hardly possible to discuss the period without Valentino entering the conversation. Actress Dagmar Godowski said she had introduced Rudy to both Jean Acker and Natasha Ramboha. Can't always believe them, but it's an interesting fact. Cameraman Charles Brosher showed me a telegram from producer John Considine instructing him to photograph the next Valentino production about Benvenuto Cellini, which of course never got made. Director Clarence Brown, a former automobile salesman, said Valentino was even crazier about cars than he was, and was also expert with movie cameras. The most charming story I heard was from Sally Blaine. She told me she and her sister Loretta Young were among the child extras employed as Arab children on the Sheep at the Oxnard location. When shooting was over and everyone had vanished back to the hotel, Valentino stayed behind to entertain the children by singing with his guitar until the kids grew sleepy. Loretta Young added, he had a beautiful white horse and he would take us kids one at a time and he would walk around a sort of block of sand. He'd take maybe 10 kids a day. Well, there were probably 100 kids on this location, and when he got through us all, then he'd start all over again. This was a big treat, and he was darling, he really was. Even though I think he made Valentino's worst picture, Cobra, now actually Young Raja is even worse, director Joseph Henneberg was honest and interesting about another of his productions. A Sainted Devil was to me a nonsensical story, that's all I can say, he said. I got to the point where I thought we'd be able to make corrections as we went along. I recommend you never do this. I liked Mrs. Valentino, she was a power. I liked Rudy Valentino, and as I talked about these things, they seemed to comprehend what I was talking about. But we'd come up to spot after spot, and the correction wasn't a correction that was any better. To my mind, was even worse in some cases than the original. And if you read the original story, my God, it was a mess. It was called The Rope's End. That was a lousy story to begin with. Well, we staggered through it, and I will say that I found that Valentino, instead of being an actor who posed, was capable of acting if you went after him. If you look at reviews of the picture, they'll always tell you it had his best acting. I shot at one time for 37 hours straight. 37 hours in order to do what? He was supposed to have been on a binge and down in a dive and raising hell with bloodshot eyes and everything wrong with him. I said, if you're game, I'm game. We're going up to work up to the point where you're at your worst. And brother, he looked it. I had him with bloodshot eyes and literally out of his head. I could say this to him. I could make him cry. I've done this with other people. I like to talk calmly and nicely to people, but as I do it, if I'm going to work with them, I like to find out a little bit about them. And I found out very often that people had something that hurt them, something that bothered them they liked to keep out of their minds. Rudy had a great love for a grandfather, and he'd tell me about him, and I knew that he felt he'd hurt his grandfather's feelings in some way. And so I got everything ready, and I just dropped it into casual conversation. I said, you were talking to me about your grandfather. Wasn't he interested in scientific agriculture? I'd get his mind on his grandfather, and when I'd get him into the scene, he was already tense. I'd get him down to one spot. I'd say, all right, you think so much about the grandfather, let's do one for the grandfather. Brother, I had the tears just rolling out of his eyes. While I was in New York, I was given the address of Natasha Ramboha. She lived a short distance from where I was staying, but no response, not even a refusal. I always thought she must be insufferable, but you may be interested in what Henneberry said about her. Mrs. Valentino was a factor in costumes and all that, anything in the artistic line. Matter of fact, she used to annoy me with the overly large decorations, which I afterwards felt she was right about. But at the time they were too staggering for me. They were impressive, they affected the audience, but they were contrary to my idea of realism, a theatrical exaggeration I didn't like. Colleen Moore thought that Natasha's obsession with the supernatural affected Rudy. When they made Cobra, they rented space next to Colleen Moore's current production at First National. Valentino's set was next to my set, she said, but this was all closed in with canvas so no one could see. So Mervyn Leroy, my gag man, and I cut a little hole in the side of the set, made a little window, and we sold peeks to all the girls at $0.05 a shot to look at Valentino. They got into such trouble on their picture they had to send for June Mathis, who'd written the script for The Four Horsemen. The reason was that Natasha, his wife, was writing the script. Every night she would go into a sort of trance and the spirits would come to do spirit writing, and she would write the script. This is what June told me. And in the morning there would be this great roll of stuff they couldn't shoot because it would be quite illegible. As his business manager George Ullman wrote, "It must not be thought that Valentino was superstitious in any small and trivial way. He had no objection to spilling salt or walking under a ladder. These things he ridiculed. The psychic never became a religion to him, but he yielded to its influence more than to any other form." A friend in New York showed me an astonishing album of Valentino stills, not just 10x8s, but huge, specially printed exhibition prints of Monsieur Beaucaire, exquisitely bound with Valentino's bookplate inside, designed by art director William Cameron Menzies. I later discovered that Ullman had had these specially made for the auction that followed Valentino's death. He knew they'd fetch higher prices with a bookplate than without, but I often wonder what happened to that album. Back in London there was a reissue of Blood and Sand, a role that Valentino was said to have preferred above all others, but a film which in this presentation did not do much for Valentino's reputation. Famous players Lasky had promised him it would be made on location in Spain, but they were a tight-fisted outfit and found a way to shoot it all in Hollywood using stock footage for the bullfight. I suppose tight-fisted is a bit unfair, perhaps sensible would be closer to the truth. I acquired a copy of a comedy called The Night Club with Raymond Griffith, in which the set seemed strangely familiar, and I realized famous players were reusing all the sets from Blood and Sand. The Valentinos became so fed up with famous players' economics, in particular a dreadful film called Young Raja, that Rudy walked out of his contract. He chose the wrong moment. The company was organizing a picture called Don Cesar de Bazan, retitled The Spanish Dancer, and they promised to shoot it on location in Europe. Oddly enough, Mary Pickford's next picture was also based on Don Cesar de Bazan, and she brought over Ernst Lubitsch to direct it as Rosita. Herbert Brennan was the director of The Spanish Dancer, and in the absence of Valentino, the company had the story revised for Pola Negri, and Antonio Marino played the role intended for Rudy. Naturally, they went no closer to Europe than the Lasky Ranch, but it all looked superb. I was fortunate enough to visit Leslie Flint when he acquired a beautiful tinted print of The Spanish Dancer, and he was willing to exchange it for a copy of an even rarer The Wonderful Chance, a minor gangster film featuring Valentino. So I can tell you The Spanish Dancer was staged on an epic scale with vast sets and would have added luster to Valentino's career. In 1976, David Gill and I began work on a series called Hollywood, about the American silent film. When we went to Hollywood to do the interviewing, we were most anxious to film Robert Florey. He had been a close friend of Valentino's and spoke about him with warmth and eloquence, but he refused point blank. It took us several hours to make him change his mind. Then, when we brought out the crew and all was ready, he refused again. The next challenge was to meet the leading lady of the Four Horsemen, Alice Terry. I called Ingram's cameraman, John Seitz, and invited him to see a screening of the newly rediscovered Conquering Power, and from him got the number of Alice Terry, Mrs. Rex Ingram. She sounded bright and friendly on the phone, but seemed reluctant to come to a public show for fear of meeting people. Fortunately, someone had given her the paperback of my book, The Parade's Gone By, and luckily I'd added to it a picture of Rex Ingram with editor Grant Whiteock. "You've used my favourite picture of Rex," she said, adding how much she liked the book. So when I suggested a private screening, she said, "There won't be a lot of people there, will there?" I said, "Just John Seitz, who'd photographed the picture, and Grant Whiteock, who'd edited it." Then she asked if there would be room for her sister and various other friends. I arrived at the parking lot at the County Museum of Art in Los Angeles at the same time as Mr. and Mrs. Seitz in their gigantic Cadillac. The door to the theatre was locked, so we went to the restaurant. A large group around a table suddenly erupted as Seitz entered. "There's Alice," he said. I saw a very old lady with rather a wizened face, and next to her a younger woman in black. I smiled at the old lady, but I must admit she didn't look familiar. "I'm Mrs. Ingram," grinned Alice, the younger one. She was still perfectly recognizable, looking like the original Alice Terry made up for a 45-year-old. The older woman was her sister, Edna. A fan arrived, his autograph book primed, and advanced on Alice. "I've fallen in love with you," he breathed. "Well, that's all over now," she said brightly. After the show, Alice said she was relieved the film was so good. I was startled that Valentino had such a small role, played it in so mannered a fashion, a strange follow-up to The Four Horsemen. "Oh," she said, "he wanted to do the role the way he saw it, and that didn't go with Rex, so there was dissent, but it was nothing like the publicity. Valentino did come to see Rex in Europe. There was no love lost between them, but no animosity." "What about Valentino leaving Metro?" John Seitz said, "That was Rex's fault, nobody else's. It was Valentino's birthday. They had a party for him at that apartment on Hollywood Boulevard. Valentino said, 'I'll be back in a couple of hours,' and Rex said, 'Valentino, stay and work here and have lunch across the street, same as the rest of us.'" Alice Terry said, "They argued. Valentino didn't want to do a couple of scenes, and Rex wanted him to do them another way, and there was a little bickering." Seitz said, "Well, anyway, I went over to the lab to see what we'd done. When I came back, we go to this place across the street, and Valentino said, 'I think I'm going to kill this Irishman. I've just told Mr. Engel I'm never going to work in the same studio as Ingram.' A couple of days later, he went over to Jesse Lasky and said, 'I need a job.' Years later, I met Marcus Lowe, and he said, 'I still like that crazy Irishman, even if he did cost me $10,000 by driving Valentino out of the studio.'" Alice said, "They were friendly afterwards, and Rex always told him, 'At least you made more money by going to the other studio.'" Seitz said, "I asked Valentino, 'Why do you spend more money than you make?' Well, he says, 'I'll tell you, Johnny. I have a hunch it won't make a damn bit of difference.' He was rather psychic in that way." Alice Terry and her sister were very hospitable, and we went to visit them as often as we could. Alas, she was conscious of how much she'd changed since she left pictures, and she too refused to appear on camera. Another important figure who also refused to appear on camera was Paola Negri. She had fond memories of Valentino, but again worried about how she would look. We were desperate for people to talk. We met cameraman Paul Ivanhoe, who'd lived with Rudy and Natasha during the period he was off the screen. Ivanhoe reminisced about their rackety life together, at one low point collecting the coins sent for fan photographs in order to eat. Here again there was a touch of the occult. One of us asked Ivanhoe when he last saw Valentino. "Just a few months ago." We thought he was talking about a screening, but no, he said he'd seen him by that door. Then, a tremendous stroke of good fortune, we met Rudy's brother Alberto. He had sailed from Italy shortly before Rudy's death, and after it, producers imagined that he could take over the same kind of picture, pulling in the same kind of audience. I liked him immensely, a Victorian gentleman with a decoration in his buttonhole and a stick, a suit that looked as though it was the latest fashion in 1939, and a flamboyant tie. He didn't resemble Rudy. His nose was oddly pinched, and it turned out that there had been several attempts at cosmetic surgery to make him resemble his brother. But he suggested Rudy must have been a charming character, and hardly the illiterate peasant he was sometimes painted. Valentino protested in a fan magazine of 1922 at being called the son of a peasant. Alberto was enchanting and very direct, spoke in a deep voice with a heavy Italian accent. He called me Mr. Kevin. Off-screen, he told us how nervous Valentino had been right up to the end about how the public would accept his pictures. On Son of the Sheik, he was on set and met Rudy made up as his father and failed to recognize him. And thus we had a surefire interview around which to weave the story of Valentino's brief stardom. It lasted a mere 5 years, and for some of that he was, by choice, off the screen. The episode needed a second half, and we chose Gloria Swanson. I spent a long time thinking of questions to cover every possible aspect of her life, but when we put the two parts together, I realized the one thing I'd forgotten was her performance with Valentino. Never mind, I told myself. Beyond the Rocks is a lost film. No one will ever see that. Here is the Valentino. Oh, have we got time to show this? Do you want to cut it?
Abbiamo un problema di tempi. Può mostrare una clip? C'è qualcuno?
We go? Here is the Valentino episode as it went out in England. It was cut down in America for a bit to accommodate commercials 30 years ago. Forgive the quality. I always say that silent films were of superb quality, but this is coming off VHS. You'll see the superb quality tonight in Four Horsemen. And I urge you not to miss it, even if you think you've seen it. You've never seen it like this. So here is Hollywood, completed in 1980. The commentator is James Mason. Thank you very much.
The crowd that lined the streets of New York in August 1926 had all the gaiety and expectation of people going to the movies. The newsreel cameras brought smiles of delight. The crowds were there for Rodolfo Valentino, the great lover. For women in the 1920s, he personified the menace of forbidden love. But the crowds that August waited in the rain to see their idol in the flesh. For some it would be the first time, for all the last. Rodolfo Valentino was dead. His body was lying in state in Campbell's funeral parlor. Valentino's effect on women astonished even the men who produced his pictures. A typical publicity stunt measured women's pulse rates as they watched a Valentino film. It was all due, they said, to his earthy origins as an illiterate peasant in Italy. But like everyone else, they misunderstood Valentino. He'd come from Italy as a young man, but he was neither illiterate nor a peasant.
We were not a rich family, neither an aristocrat one. We were in the middle class, but in quite comfortable position. My father was a veterinarian, a health officer, and a biologist. The majority of story not truthful, that he came here because he was a poor boy, an immigrant, to make money, to try to find fortune. No. In his life, he was always guided and pushed by spirit of adventure. He used to say, Italy is too small for me.
When he arrived in New York at the age of 18, Valentino was hard up. Like so many immigrants, he had a photograph taken in rented clothes to reassure his family back home.
And in order not to worry my mother, when he wrote, he went to the Waldorf Astoria and wrote letter from there, but he didn't sleep there. He was not a guest of the Waldorf Astoria. On the contrary, he told me that sometime he even slept in the Central Park.
Eventually, Valentino got a job at a New York cafe, dancing with the customers.
He never took in his life any dancing lesson. But he had a natural grace in dancing.
When he went to Hollywood, his Italian looks condemned him to play the gigolo in an endless parade of screen villains. In 1919, director Al Parker gave him an important role in Eyes of Youth. His career was improving. His private life was miserable. His wife, actress Jean Acker, had left him, and that Christmas he was depressed and lonely.
I said, "What are you doing for Christmas?" He said, "Well, nothing." I said, "Haven't you any place to go?" He said, "Well, no, I don't." I said, "Well, you sure do." I said, "You're going to come home with me. This is our big night. My mother and father will be there and the presents, and you're going to be right with us." He said, "Oh, that'll be marvelous." So we made him Santa Claus. I had a red cape, and then we put a red hat on him, and we got cotton and put a white beard on him, and he handed out the presents. A lot of people have... it's made me laugh. A lot of people, you know, said, oh, how well they knew Rudy and what they did for him and all that sort of thing. And I think, well, there was one Christmas they forgot about Rudy before he was anything. After he did the Four Horsemen, that was different.
Valentino now entered film history. He was cast as Julio, an Argentinian playboy. Director Rex Ingram exploited his skill as a dancer and his frank sensuality. At this period, the tango was regarded as an indecent dance. Ingram used it as a symbol of open eroticism. The Four Horsemen was scripted by June Mathis. She had spotted Valentino in Eyes of Youth. She became a close friend for the rest of his career. The film established Valentino as a new kind of screen lover. But this success did not bring him instant stardom. He played straightforward roles in other Metro films, Camille with the Russian actress Nazimova. The most impressive thing about Camille was its sets. And Valentino was surprised to learn that their designer was a young dancer, Natasha Rambova. Her real name was Winifred Hudnut. She was heiress to the Hudnut cosmetic fortune. Valentino fell in love with her, and the romance perfectly suited her ambitions. She was determined to become a major producer. Valentino joined famous players Lasky and was featured opposite Agnes Ayres in The Sheik. These shots were taken during the production. In the title role, Valentino was a sensation. He played an Arab sheik who abducts an English girl to his desert tent. Natasha considered the story utter trash. Valentino was not happy about it either, but he mesmerized most women who saw it. His acting may look strange today, but some people saw that he conveyed ideas with his eyes which they daren't put into words. The very quality which appealed to women upset their husbands. Valentino inspired envy and ridicule from American men.
They were not very understanding about Valentino. He came along as the first of the great foreign lovers. See, that was one of the interesting things about Gable. Every American man was perfectly willing that his wife should be in love with Gable, because Gable was what he'd like to have been. But they were not willing that their wife should be in love with this Dago.
The Sheik made Valentino a top star. Natasha agreed to marry him. But Valentino's marriage ended in jail. The laws of California required a full year between divorce and remarriage. A bigamy charge was dismissed, but Natasha raised the question, why had famous players Lasky allowed its biggest star to go to jail? Valentino's next picture, Blood and Sand, would be made in Spain with no expense spared, promised the company. But they shot it cheaply on the back lot. It was a success, but Valentino and Natasha felt cheated. They were depressed still more by the young Raja.
He had the right, though, of an approval of a story, which they recognize in the contract. But actually, practically, they didn't do it. And that started the fight.
Valentino walked out on his contract, refusing to appear in any more cheap pictures. But the fans kept writing in for photographs.
We had a printing box, the negative, and we used to print 100 a night, dry them on the floor, and towels, and God knows what. And his signature was on it with a stamp. And we would send a postcard saying, if you want a photograph of Rudy Valentino, please send 25 cents for the course or whatever. And as we were getting between 8 and 9 sacks of mail a day from the fans, Natasha and I and Rudy, we used to open up the letters and count the quarters. And in between pictures, it fed us, you know.
Valentino and Natasha were out of work and broke, but they felt they were fighting for their artistic integrity. A public relations man, George Ullman, found there was nothing in his contract to stop Valentino making a personal appearance to her. He arranged for the couple to promote a beauty preparation. Valentino and Natasha gave dancing displays, and wherever they appeared, vast crowds greeted them. The climax of their act was the tango from the Four Horsemen.
He was so absolutely hounded by publicity.
crowds would gather. I've heard tales of women picking up cigar butts in the streets and cherishing them. It was just insanity.
As part of the mineral lava deal, Valentino had to judge local beauty contests. A promoter called David Selznick exploited Valentino's absence from the screen with a film of his appearance at Madison Square Garden in New York. He released it at great profit, for fresh footage of Valentino was gold dust. This enormous popularity obliged Adolf Zukor of famous Players Lasky to conclude a settlement. Mounting debts obliged Valentino to agree. He and Natasha took a European holiday. These shots are from the home movies they made en route. Valentino was already Italy's most famous emigrant, yet he was not as well known in Italy as he was in the rest of Europe.
And he had just come back from Rome, which he had visited for the first time since becoming a big star. And Bibi said, "Tell me, Rudy, what did they think of you when you arrived in Italy?" And he thought for a moment, he said, "Bibi, in Italy, I was just another wop."
The influence of Natasha affected Valentino's new film, Monsieur Beaucaire. The critics were quick to notice it. The film was too arty, they said, too self-conscious for Valentino fans. They expected that quality of menace, and they didn't get it. Valentino's co-star was Lois Wilson.
He was a very serious worker. Rudolph didn't kid on the set and that sort of thing. He was a very generous actor to work with, charming. And I had known him before. I knew him quite well before we made the picture as a person. And I just found him a very charming, lovely person with a terrific sense of humor.
Valentino displayed humor and elegance in Beaucaire, but the fans expected passion.
We found a delicatessen or a store on the plaza here that sold very, very long spaghetti in a cardboard box. It was about 6 or 7 feet long. And we used to buy those boxes and never break the spaghetti. So before Woody prepared them and he had boiling water, he would stand on the ladder and slowly move those spaghettis into the pot.
Valentino entertained important executives.
When they would start trying to cut it with a knife, says, "Oh no, in Italy you never cut that, you wind it on your fork." Well, how are you going to wind 6 feet? 6 feet of spaghetti, you raise your head and wind, and when you're done, you wind again, and everything falls down. And we had a lot of fun doing that.
But Valentino had no sense of humor about his wife. He submitted to photographs like these because he loved and admired her. Over him, she exerted an almost hypnotic influence. But now, her interest was fading. So was his career. In the hope of putting new life into the romance, he bought a house, Falcon Lair. He gave Natasha a free hand with the interior design. But Natasha never spent a night in the place. To conceal the broken marriage, they went in front of the newsreel cameras and played a farewell scene. Natasha was going east to make a film on her own. They would never live together again. Valentino signed with United Artists to make The Eagle with Vilma Banky for producer Joseph Schenck. Directed by Clarence Brown, it proved far more successful than the films Natasha had supervised. Valentino played a Russian bandit married in the death cell before being led out to die. Valentino began a romance with Pola Negri. He spent money recklessly. His friends asked why. "I have a hunch," he said, "that it won't make a damn bit of difference." He drove recklessly. He had several near-fatal crashes. Natasha sued for divorce. He became more and more depressed. To ease his money problems, he determined to make a surefire hit, a sequel to The Sheik, and was delighted to have an old friend, George Fitzmaurice, as director. Fitzmaurice had a sophisticated understanding of Valentino's appeal. Valentino's influence on men's fashions encouraged the wearing of wristwatches and slave bracelets. And when a powder machine appeared in a men's washroom, the Chicago Tribune blamed it on Valentino. Why didn't someone quietly drown Rudolph Guglielmo, alias Valentino, years ago?
Well, it was very unjust. Valentino was an extremely manly man and could probably have taken most of them if it came to having a good fight, you know. He was a fine swordsman, good fencer, and there was nothing of the powder puff about him. This one particular thing really made Valentino go quite stark mad. He resented it just terribly, and he said to me, "This isn't fair. It is not fair. I mean, I have none of those attributes. I'm a man, I've always shown it. I have been madly in love with only one woman, but I've always been in love with her. And to make belittling pink powder puff remarks is a very unjust thing, and if the guy will come out here, I will tangle with him face to face."
The man never appeared. Valentino staged an exhibition bout under the eye of Jack Dempsey. The pressures on him were enormous, fighting his divorce, facing bankruptcy, coping with a gastric ulcer, and now fending off attacks in the press. A few days later, he fell ill and was rushed to hospital.
They didn't want to take any responsibility of making an operation on Rudolph Valentino. So they were waiting for some big surgeon, well-known surgeon, experienced surgeon, to come along. But being on Sunday, they couldn't find anybody until 6 o'clock.
Precious hours were wasted while the fever mounted. When the surgeon was found, he discovered a perforated ulcer.
The first 2 or 3 days after operation was getting better. All of a sudden, he had to turn for the worse because the peritonitis developed and was the one who killed him.
Valentino lay in state at Campbell's funeral parlor.
A great many of them really had had a lot of feeling and affection for Valentino. So it was a crowd filled with emotion and with hysterical emotion that you weren't at all sure what they might do. Hysterical crowds behave badly at funerals.
7 days later, the funeral. Ben Lyon took charge.
I received word one day at the Ambassador Hotel in New York from the florist in the lobby that they had a phone order from Miss Pola Negri to place a blanket of white roses across the top of the casket 6 feet before, and in the center in 1-foot letters in red roses, P-O-L-A, Pola. Well, let's make it look like an opening night for her, a premiere or something. I said, under no circumstances will those flowers be placed on that casket. And they weren't, and of course she was furious and put up a terrific fight, and I said, they're not going on. And the whole thing turned out to be, if you remember, that she fainted and fell down and had to be carried. It was a premiere for Pola Negri.
Among the pallbearers were Adolf Zukor, Marcus Lowe, Rex Ingram, Douglas Fairbanks, and Joseph Schenck. Natasha Rambova did not appear. There was to be a second funeral in Hollywood. Alberto Valentino joined the train for the 5-day journey.
We went across country and it was amazing. You can't believe me, but it's true that to see the people that they came and the way in which they were trying to show their shock and their affection for. I was awake early in the morning because it was just dawn and the train stopped, and I was informed that was a group of people from Erie which had come with guitar, mandolin. The great majority were Italian living here in this country, and they just asked me permission if they could sing and play some of the Italian song for the memory of Rudy. It was very touching.
It was the biggest funeral Hollywood had ever seen. At the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills, stars like Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks paid their last respects.
Schenck collected 2 $1 million insurances on his life. They didn't even buy him a grave. He's resting in a box that belonged to June Mattis. See, she had free, whatever they call those drawers where they put them in the wall, for herself, for her mother, and she had bought one for her husband at the time, Balboni. And so when Rudy died, she says, if you have no grave for Rudy, you can use the spot of Balboni's, and he's still there.
Valentino was 31 years old. His death gave him a status he had never sought in his life. He had become immortal.
E ringraziamo Kevin per questa bellissima introduzione al nostro convegno che ci permette di riassumere già molti dei temi di cui parleremo oggi.